Okay, so this identification is on Franklin Delano Roosevelt, also called Franklin Roosevelt or FDR for short, which is very much a nickname that was used at the time for him. He became president of the United States, one of the most important presidents in American history. He was born in 1882 and died in 1945. Um, and he died right at the end of World War II. So he was president through both the Great Depression and then again through another huge event in American and world history, through World War II. So a little bit about things that affected him in his life. Um, you see him here in a wheelchair, which people rarely saw. Um, but Roosevelt, when he was younger, before he was president, contracted a dreaded illness called polio. And people were terrified of this disease, probably even more so than in the era even that we're living in now, with where so much is going on concerning illness. But polio was a disease that affected rich, it affected poor, it affected all ages, especially young people, but it did affect all ages. It uh, could destroy people's respiratory system, but also many people ended up paralyzed as a result of the disease. If they survived the disease, many ended up paralyzed or partially paralyzed. So Roosevelt went through this, and he was a very wealthy family man and from a wealthy family, but his experiences with the disease really put him more in touch with people who were ill or people who were poor or people who struggle. So I think it greatly affected his uh, attitude towards the world, and certainly seemed to show when he was president. So he became president. Okay, so he became president in 1932, and the Great Depression had been going on already for almost 4 years, a real nightmare for the country. Roosevelt moved up from being governor of New York, and then he ran for president against Hoover and promised Americans to do something about the Great Depression. And that he certainly did. When he was elected, in a landslide, because people felt that Hoover had not been doing the job and had not been uh, creating programs that needed to happen uh, with the Great Depression. So Roosevelt ran on what he called the New Deal. And he promised to have programs that would help unemployed throughout the country. And and so he was elected to that, and immediately when he became president, he started many emergency measures. The first he was to do was to save the banking system because the people had panicked and were withdrawing money from the banks uh, in a great amount from all across the country, to the point that the banks were closing down. And people were afraid that they were going to lose their money because some banks had gone out of business. And in those days, if a bank went out of business, you just lost your money. So people were panicked. So the first thing Roosevelt did was create a short banking holiday, in which would slow down people from withdrawing money. And then he created federal deposit insurance, so that people knew that even if the bank shut down, the government would insure the money and still give them their money. So this, right off the bat, alleviated the fear of people losing their money in bank failures. And he came out and said, the only thing to fear, the only thing we have to fear, is fear itself. This was before World War II, he was referring to being afraid of the future and being afraid of losing your money. And he wanted to give confidence to people that there was a future in which things would improve. So he created many programs during the New Deal and focused on saving the country. And certainly, this is why he was so loved by Americans. And even today, most historians regard him as one of the greatest presidents of all time. And I would agree that he is in the top of the American presidents because he not only had to deal with the 10 years of the Great Depression, but then he had to deal with the worst war in world history, which was to come, which was World War II. Um, so after the Depression was slowing down in 1939, World War II began, and now the United States was embroiled in a gigantic war, a world war. We see here in this slide the United States was attacked by Japan on December 7th, 1941, and in a sneak attack on Hawaii, and pretty much destroy the American Navy. So um, Roosevelt stated shortly after the attack, hours later, he stated, "Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan." So this brought the United States into World War II, and hundreds of thousands of men joined the army the day after this happened to defend the country against the attack by Japan. But it also brought the United States into the war against Nazi Germany, in which Hitler had become such a powerful dictator. So it brought the United States into a huge two-front war between Nazi Germany and Japan. And so the United States, right after this attack on Pearl Harbor, then joined the war against Hitler. So here we see a plaque showing that famous quote he made after Pearl Harbor happened and the United States entered World War II. And so he remained president throughout for the next 4 years of this gigantic war um, on two fronts, and he was very successful in leading the country during that period. You see here his quote, one of his many quotes: "Democracy cannot succeed unless those who express their choice are prepared to choose wisely. The real safeguard of democracy, therefore, is education." So he was well known for his quotes and well known for speaking directly to the American people through what he called the fireside chats. They were radio broadcasts that he did every week so Americans could hear him talk. He did that throughout the Depression and also throughout World War II. See another quote of his. Okay. This shows him, obviously, this you can see he's aged a lot here. This would appear to be when he was talking to the press about World War II. And so his health began to deteriorate. And because now he had been running the country throughout the war, and Uh, he had redefined the Democrat Party and really made a huge changes in the Democrat Party at the time also. So he's in many ways the founder of the modern Democrat Party. He had led the country through the Depression and World War II, and then just shortly before the end of the war, days before Hitler died, Roosevelt died. Um, he basically died of a stroke, but really exhaustion, and so. But the war was already all but won at that time, and he had served by far the longest of any president. He had served over 12 years, had been elected 4 times,